Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George. Today we're going to start work on our Octarius Kill Team box. And we're going to start with the biggest stuff, which means terrain. There's a lot of it in this box, so much so that it could take a lot of time to get it to look good. So I thought it would be a good idea to try a few things to make sure that we could have a good looking bit of scenery, especially since it's orky. It's got to be cool, but also we don't want to spend hours and hours and hours on it, right? So that's kind of my thing, getting decent results with a minimal amount of time. So to start things off, I'm going to play with a product that I've been eyeing, but I was pretty sure wasn't going to work for this hobby, but I think I just couldn't resist. Let's give it a shot. This is Krylon Hammered. It's a spray paint. It's not exactly a primer. I don't know whether it's going to work or not, but at least if it doesn't work, it'll be out of my mind. I don't have to worry about it anymore. And if it does work, maybe we can have some cool looking textured terrain quickly and easily. Let's see how this works out. So, here's the basic idea. We've got these two products that I'm going to use to prime my models, my scenery, my terrain models, I guess. And I know this stuff works. This is flat black from Rust-Oleum. I've used it in a couple of builds. I really like it. And it's basically a little bit more expensive than the other paint primers you can get at your local hardware store. Assuming you can get something at your local hardware store. Supplies are running short. They've been short for a couple of months now, and so sometimes you got to get what you can get. This was available. It's flat, and as it turns out, it works really well. It's got like a weird trigger that is the reason for why it's so a little bit more expensive, but it's really satisfying to use. And if you make sure that it doesn't clog, then you're going to have a good time with this primer. This stuff I have never used, and I haven't seen anyone use it before. There's probably a really good reason why. It's not that expensive. I think I paid $10 for this at my local craft store, and I think I've seen it in some other places, so it's available. The trick is this going to be a good product to use to prime your models? So the hope here is that if it does work, since it's silver, and in fact it's got like a texture to it, then it's going to save us a lot of time by not having to base our models. So, for example, this is one of the terrain pieces that's included in the Octarius box. It's assembled, and it's fairly sturdy. Actually, this one isn't as sturdy as it could be. I may have to do some stuff to this, but see what I mean? So there's a lot of surface area, right? So when I prime these three pieces, I'm going to have to go back and, since I don't have an airbrush, by hand introduce the base coat, which is in this case going to be some kind of metallic color. That's a lot of base coating. If you don't have an airbrush, this is gonna be a chore. So I'm hoping that by using a silver primer, I can avoid that base coating. So let's give this a shot. So this is going to be Krylon Hammered with the texture effect, and this is just the normal black primer that you would use. Let's see what they look like. Let's see how much more work adding the base is going to be, and I'll let you know whether or not you should even consider something like this. Wish me luck. All right, here are my This is my test models. They're basically the exact same thing. I think the legs are slightly different, in a slightly different position, but they're like a little, like a guard tower thing. It's not one of those large terrain pieces. I wanted to start with something small in case this doesn't work the way I want it to. It doesn't hurt any of the big pieces. This is your standard flat primer. It looks exactly the way it's supposed to. I like it. So this is going to be our control model. This is the hammered silver primer. Well, it's spray paint, so I don't know if it's going to work. However, just looking at it this way, it looks fine. It looks pretty decent. I don't know if you can tell the texture. It's a lot more subtle than I expected. It's basically just silver. It's got some flecks of texture here and there. It's more evident on these long pieces like that. So kind of just to start, I don't know how much value this is going to add to the final appearance of our model. It might just be that we can just stick with the silver, and that'll introduce the time savings, and the texture flakes don't really do much, but we won't know for sure until we give it a shot. So let's start with our usual steps. We'll start with our control model, since this is the one that's going to be most familiar, but also it's going to have a treatment much like all of our other models. We have to apply a base coat, in this case a glaze of a metallic silver that I have plenty of, and that's this stuff. It's plate mail metal from Army Painter, and that's going to be the foundation of much of our model. So we're going to start by applying this glaze. I'm using a kind of a nice big brush that's relatively flat, so it can have good coverage right away. So right away we can tell that by using a glaze, a lot of the undercoat shines or kind of goes through the silver paint. That's exactly what I was hoping would happen, because I want it to have kind of a darker feel. It'll be more complex, a little bit more rich, if it has various things happening at the same time. So I'm going to do the same thing to all these surfaces that require metal. There's some of these that don't. So I'm just going to pick them out and get to work. So this the silver model isn't going to be entirely base coat free, because there is a feature of this model that makes me suggest that this is stone, not metal. So this girder is metal, this is metal, this is stone or concrete or something like that, and it's reinforced by metal. So we're going to need to make that metallic. We'll add the base coat here, and this is where we'll tell whether or not this paint can work as a primer. So right away, I'm very happy to report that the gray paint that I'm using had no problem adhering to this paint. So the very first result, I think, is pretty clear. I know it's hard to pick out here on camera because the silver color is essentially just gray with some metallic flakes in it, I think. So it reads as different shades of silver, in this case gray. But yeah, I didn't have any trouble getting the paint on there. It doesn't seem to be repelling or anything like that. So you could use this as a primer if you wanted to. I don't know about the long-term effects. Like, I don't know if there's any kind of chemical interaction between the acrylics and the primer, but at least my initial results, they're good. If you wanted prime with this Krylon Hammered textured stuff, you're probably going to be in a good place. I will say this, before you do, make sure you mask off any areas that you don't want this texture on. So here, for example, this tire, I masked it off with a little silly putty. and made sure that this primer didn't get on my, at least on that part of the model. I'm going to go back and prime that with just normal brush-on primer and then give it the nice black color. So we're good. I'm going to finish basing these up. All right, here are my structures. I'm not sure what to call these things. I've got all the basing done, and that includes painting up the tires, making sure they're black, and getting the metal rims on there nice and rusty. For that I just used a really light brown, I think it was Monster Brown, but I made sure it was very thin, and so it was almost like a glaze or a wash, and I had to apply it a couple of times to get the right effect, but it looks pretty rusty. In fact, because you can see the black showing through there, to me it looks rusty rather than brown. So that was kind of what I was going for. These fuel cans, I went with green, kind of just to, I don't know, set them apart visually. Maybe they were stolen from Imperial Guard, and their equipment is usually green, something like that. So, in terms of differences, there's not many. They do look subtly different. And it's kind of hard because the metal reflects, but the silver on this guy is a little darker, and that's because I used, it was a glaze. So this is the black primed model. This was the model primed just straight silver, then hammered, and you'll see the little H there at the bottom, so I can keep track of which is which. But there is a visual difference, but it's very subtle. So far as the texture of it is concerned, there is a difference, but it's very subtle. This has got a little bit more texture than this. It is easier for me to see on these long pieces, although it might not be easy for you to see through the camera. It's just a kind of a sandy texture to it, which is interesting, but it's, I don't know, it's not very pronounced. I'm hoping that when I hit the second stage, which is going to be the wash, I'm hoping that that'll come out. I'm going to do two different kinds of washes here. The first one is going to be going kind of for a rusty look, and that's going to go on these girders. And so I'm going to use Fuegian Orange. It's a wash from Games Workshop that I enjoy using pretty well. It isn't that frequently since I don't have a whole lot of rusty metal, but it does give it a nice rusty look. For the top part, I'm going to go with mostly a dark wash. I want to distinguish the types of metal, and because otherwise it's just going to be a blob of rust, and that's not really what I want to go for. And also the parts of this model that are concrete, I'm going to make sure that those are, I'm just going to black wash those. So I've got a couple of things to do, and I'm going to start with a Fuegian Orange because, I don't know, reasons. And so I'm going to start right there. You don't have to be very, don't have to go too liberal with this. You can just do a light coat. And try to be clean where you can, because you want to avoid having to repaint stuff. And this is one of those cases where you really do want the wash running down on you. You want gravity to pull it down, because that's kind of how rust works, at least in this universe. It is kind of promoted by water, and water, when it rains, it goes downwards, and that's kind of where you see rust. So you do want to have some of the pooling towards the bottom. I think that's appropriate here. In fact, even on the concrete, a little bit of the rust would work well, because you see that out in the real world too. Getting real close to the end of this project, at least getting it tabletop ready. It's looking pretty decent, and I wanted to just add a little bit more character to this piece, so I took some gray wash, so basically some gray paint, and I thinned it down quite a bit, and I made a wash out of it, and so I put it over the wheel, and it turned out too gray. So I thought, well, let me play around with it. I added another coat of dark wash over that gray wash, and I think it looks a lot better. So there's a lot of little, well, not a lot, there's a couple of little modifications, a couple of little extra touches that still involve just, washes and glazes that you can use to improve the look of your model without spending a ton of time, and I think they're well worth it. It's also a really good place to kind of experiment with washes and glazes to make sure that you kind of combine them in interesting ways to get effects that might be hard to do otherwise. I know I'm fairly conservative with my models, but with something like this, you can kind of go nuts, and at the end of the day, if it looks kind of weird, well, it's orky terrain. A similar thing that I did was once the Fuegian orange, that rusty look, wash dried, I went back and I hit this one with some dark tone, just a wash over the kind of the girder parts, in the hopes of kind of enhancing the texture, hopefully to get in a few more shadows, and it sort of worked, but I think I need another coat of it. It's not something I can do really to this other one, because this one doesn't have that texture, so we'll just be darkening up the rust, which might be a thing to do anyway, but technically speaking, at this point, we're basically done. This is tabletop ready. If this is as far as you want to take it, fantastic. Knock yourself out. But I do think this model or this kit would benefit from a few extra touches. They'll take a little bit of extra time, but you're already doing it. You've already got paint on your wet palette. We might as well give it a shot, right? So, for example, there's that little wrench detail. I think that would be kind of cool to pick out. I don't know exactly what color I would make it, but maybe do something with it. Additionally, you'll notice that the steel beam and the steel kind of joins, they're the same color, and I think it would work better if they were different. So if you look at this piece here, this is a concrete, and it's attached by these metal rusty, things. This is kind of holding things together, and that looks pretty neat. And I'd like to be able to do something similar to this other piece to kind of increase the complexity a little bit, complexity and visual appeal of it as well. Maybe we can even give this an extra little bit of color. Right now, it's just the metal, and that's fine, but maybe the people who built this, maybe the orcs that built this, added some color because they like color. But I don't want to kill the vibe that it's got right now. I want to imply color. So I'm going to keep using some washes, and this time, like for the actual color elements, I'll probably use very, very diluted colors just to kind of lay it on top and to give it an extra pop of color. Yeah, let me play around with it and see what I can come up with. So I've prepared a very thin glaze of a green that I hadn't used before. So I'm going to use that on these big panels right here. The hope is that I get the idea of green, but also some of the rust, some of the metal, and some of that dark tone. While still getting a hint of color. Like maybe it was green at one point, but over time and abuse, sun bleaching, what have you, it lost most of its color, but some of the color is still there. And so that's what that looks like, and I think it's going to work the way I intend. I'm going to do the very same thing to this other piece with a different shade of green. This is a deeper, more vibrant green. The idea is that these are found pieces, so they're going to have different colors. Now, to make these glazes, I'm using just a small drop of the pigment that I want, the paint that I want, and then I'm adding 2 drops of flow improver because I don't want it to start separating out. And I'm also using 3 to 4 drops of water, and that gets me a very thin wash that still works the way it's supposed to. It gives me decent coverage without breaking up. I made the orange glaze a little less thick just because I know that this particular shade of orange doesn't cover very well, so I wanted a little stronger so that the orange comes through. This is one of those deals where when you're mixing your shades, you kind of want to have some experience with these paints because while they're the same brand, they seem to act a little differently from each other. So you kind of have to learn which ones give you good coverage, which ones give you not so good coverage, and adjust your mixes accordingly. But if you take some care, you'll get some pretty decent results with these things. Our pieces of terrain are looking pretty decent. If you're stuck with me this far, you were interested in doing a little bit beyond tabletop readiness, and I think we're really close. You'll notice there's these connecting bars. They're kind of like haphazardly connecting major pieces of steel and concrete. I've picked them out in the same colors I used up here, but I used a brighter version of them. I tried layering on the same kind of really thin mixture that I had here. I tried to just kind of build up one after the other. It just wasn't really doing the trick. I wanted something brighter to offset kind of the overall dullness of the colors. And so I went back and pre-mixed just a less thin version of it, and so it's basically just a layer paint, and so I use the same colors, but they look different because of the concentration of the pigment, and it looks pretty good. It's the same kind of thing over here. The smaller bands, so these bands here, kind of connecting, wrapping around the concrete, I just picked them out in black, and I even went in and paid a little extra attention to the wrench that's there. Just kind of picked out some of the parts of the wrench in yellow, and the rest of it was black. So it was black first, let it dry, and then hit it with some yellow layer paint. And it doesn't look fantastic, but you can tell what's there, and I think that's kind of the overall idea. So, again, here's another decision point. We could just stop here. Oh, and by the way, I blacked out the edges of this platform because I wanted to give this the idea, tell a story that it was welded off or cut with a torch. and so the edges are black. And I want to go back here, and so again, this is an optional step just to kind of add the final oomph, the final finishing touch to your model to make it, I don't know, to make it look really nice, and still haven't spent a ton of time on this thing. So what I want to do is I want to go back here and hit these edges and a bunch of other parts of this model with a metallic dry brush. And so I'm using a dark metal color. I'm using this guy right here. It's a gunmetal from Army Painter. And this is that step where I'm never sure if I'm about to just ruin a paint job I'm reasonably happy with, or if I'm going to be super successful. I just never know with dry brushing. Sometimes it looks amazing, and other times I'm like, why? Here we go. Slightly over these surfaces. And really just the ones you can see. I'll do the same thing to the tops of these platforms. There we go. Kind of brings back that metallic sheen. And I'll just do a little bit of that same stuff over all the major edges. So I'm just giving a quick pass over anything that's metallic. And especially these guys right here, these pieces with the more vivid colors. I want to go back over them with this dry brush to make sure that they read as metal parts as opposed to painted parts. Well, I guess painted metal parts. You know what I mean? Well, here they are. These are the terrain pieces. I give them a hit of some flat varnish, and they're ready to go. They look pretty decent. I cannot complain, and it didn't take very long. Most of the time I spent on this was on drying, and towards the end I just hit it with a blow dryer to speed the process up, because I want to get on to other projects. I don't want to spend the normal amount of time waiting for this to dry. And so the dry brush looks pretty neat. It does, I think, enhance kind of just the sheen of it, makes it clear it's metallic while still retaining the colors, some of them dull and some of them more vivid. The very first question that I posed on this video was, can you use this stuff? Can you use a Krylon Hammered paint as a primer? And the answer is yes. I didn't have any trouble using it. In fact, it's probably better than many of the other Krylon products I've used. It's pretty flat. It doesn't feel tacky to the touch. Certainly not after you add the paints that you're using. So, you know, it's not bad. However, are you getting yourself anything extra? And yes-ish. The effect is really, really subtle. So these are the two that I've got. One of them is primed with the hammered thing. Others are primed with the black. Can you tell which is which? Let me check. Okay. I had kind of an inkling that this is the one that was initially black, because it looks a little darker than this one. And as it turns out, I'm right. This one is the black primer, which makes this the hammered. But other than other than the color, right, the tone of it, I don't see a lot of texture on this guy. That story changes a little bit when you look here. It's a little harder to tell because of the lighting and stuff, but one of these is the textured, that hammer, and I think it's this one right here. That's the normal one right there. And you can kind of tell that there's something happening there. There's some texture. If we look at the same leg here, again, you can kind of see there's something happening there. But I think I needed to use some dark wash to bring that out. And I did that, and I think that's the only reason you can kind of tell. So my conclusion here is that it really doesn't buy you much. Here, I'll show you another point of comparison, the gas can. Here's a place where I didn't actually want it, but I didn't mask it because I just thought, well, let's just see what it looks like. And one of these is the hammered, the other one is black, the black primer. I'm pretty sure this is the black primer. Oh no, this is the, wait, what? Yeah. Okay, so this is, this one right here is the hammered gas can. That's the one primed with black. And I can see a difference, but it's very subtle. So I guess what I'm saying is that A, you absolutely can use it if you want. B, it's not going to buy you much. Maybe I'm not using it right. I think if I try this again, I'm going to give it a nice thick coat of it. Maybe that'll give me some texture. But as it stands, if you just need a silver primer, this will work really well. If you're looking for a way of adding texture to a metallic model, I don't know, I can't recommend it for that. So there you have it, mixed results as per usual for these tests, but I think I like the way the kind of my quick painting technique works on this. I relied on more washes than I normally do, but I think it does the job. We'll see how well this technique works applied to larger structures. So until next time, when we try that one out, thank you very much for watching. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.